that heaven is my home. As they sung the other night, heaven will be worth a journey when I get there. And sure as you get there, heaven will be worth a journey. But they wasn't about to budge. They didn't make the slightest movement. They didn't change their opinion. They had their mind made up. I remember the song that they taught us young people when we got saved. One of the first ones they taught us was, I've got my foot on the rock and my mind's made up. I've come a few years since then, but you know what? My foot's still on the rock and my mind is made up. I plan on making heaven my home. I've got family there. I've got loved ones there. But most importantly, the one that died for me is there. And I want to take whatever crowns that I've got and I want to lay them at his feet. And I just want to bow down and I want to worship him. I won't care to bow down and worship him because he is worthy. But they wouldn't bow. They wouldn't budge. They wouldn't give in. And one scripture talks about when we've done all we know to do, having done everything, therefore stand. Don't back up. Don't give in. You know, if we don't stand now, and the sad thing about down through the years, I've heard different ones talk. I've heard different ones say, well, you know, you started school off with the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, and then you would have a prayer to God, and I don't know if they still do the Pledge of Allegiance anymore, but I know that very few, if any, start the day off with prayer with their children. But you know what? I wouldn't back down from that. If you're doing that, let me encourage you. Like I said, stay true to God. God will stay true to you. And don't bow, don't budge, don't give in. Stand your ground, and having done all to stand therefore, and have yourself have the armor of God on, and be ready, because the battle is on, folks. The devil's not going, like I said a while ago, he comes along sometimes and he tells us, well, if you'll ease up, I'll ease up. He won't do it. He'll lie to you, and he'll intensify that, and he'll make it, as we'll find here, one scripture in Daniel here talked about that he even went so far as to heat it 7 times hotter. And you know what? I don't know about you, but when I think about that 7 times hotter, that's God's number. That's the number of completion. That's the number of perfectness, and that's just God's number. And somehow there's something that strikes me about that 7. I love that number. But now if they said we're going to heat it 6 times hotter, they would have worried. But you know what? They wouldn't worried if they'd have done it 14 times hotter, because they knew their God, and their God knew them. And he goes on to say in verse 27, they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't budge, and they commanded them to bring them up and to throw them into that fire. And sure enough, I believe that they bound them and they threw them in there. And verse 27 says, and the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power. Let me tell you something. The Bible tells us that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises up against you, one day God's going to take care of it. So let me encourage you, pastor, preacher, teacher, evangelist, prophet, child of God, lay member, whoever you may be listening tonight, stand your ground and don't give in. Don't you bow, don't you budge. And I guarantee you, when the world or the enemy intensifies the flames that you may spiritually be in, it won't have no effect on you. Upon whose body the fire had no power. You just don't hear that. There's people probably every day that die in house fires that burn up. But let me tell you something. If God is with you, you can overcome anything. It says, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. The only thing that fire did was it burned loose the things that had them bound, the ropes or whatever it was that they had them tied with and they had them bound with. That was the only thing that fire burned. And so the last one, the first one, they wouldn't bow. The second one, they wouldn't budge. And the last one, they wouldn't burn. They were not consumed. They were not destroyed by the fire. Why? Right on down says they looked in and they saw they saw 4, and one of them looked to the other, said, "Did we not cast 3 men into this burning fire?" And they said, "Yes, King, we cast." Maybe the king looked at it and saw, maybe that's who it was, and said, "Did we not cast 3?" And he said, "I see 4. And the 4th one's like unto the Son of God," I believe it was. So let me tell you something. When you're in the fire, or when you're in the valley, or wherever it may be that you may be tonight, let me encourage you, look around. If you're in the valley tonight, the Bible talks about him being the lily in the valley. The song even says he'll be your lily in your valley, and you can watch him bloom all the time. Even in the desert, he'll make rivers of living water. He'll make water to come forth if that's what you need. And you may say, "Well, preacher, I've been in the desert for a while." Well, just begin to look around and look for the water, because I believe God is fixing to open up a miracle for you and do things for you. And those of you that's sick and afflicted in your body, let me tell you something. To be absent from this body is to be present with the Lord. And you say, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You ain't facing what I'm facing." But I hope that I can have faith to stand if I get a report from the doctor that turns out to not be a good report, that I can look to the Lord and say, "Lord, whatever your will is, let it be done."